Japanese woman said, "I'm sick, I can't walk. Can I stay one night?" What black soldier did shocked everyone. August 14th, 1945, 3 miles east of Okinawa. The dirt road leading to Camp Buckner stretched empty in the late afternoon heat. Hiroko Matsumoto's legs finally gave out at the checkpoint barrier. She had walked 17 miles in 2 days. Her younger sister Yuki caught her before she hit the ground. Behind them, 11 other Japanese civilians stood frozen in exhaustion and fear. They had fled the caves of southern Okinawa, where American flamethrowers were burning out the last holdouts. The American sentry raised his rifle. He was young, maybe 19. His fingers stayed off the trigger, but his hands shook. Sergeant Marcus Johnson of the 327th Quartermaster Battalion heard the commotion from the supply tent. He walked toward the gate with measured steps, his boots crunching on the coral gravel. Hiroko looked up through cracked glasses at the black soldier approaching. Everything her teachers had told her about American brutality, about the savage treatment awaiting Japanese prisoners, flooded back. She had seen the propaganda posters, the monsters with fangs, the promises of torture and death. Johnson stopped 3 feet away. He studied the group of civilians huddled together like frightened rabbits. The woman on the ground was maybe 25 years old. Her civilian dress was torn. Blood had dried on her feet from walking barefoot after her shoes disintegrated. "I'm sick," Hiroko said in broken English, learned from school textbooks. "I can't walk. Can I stay one night?" The words came out barely above a whisper. She expected a rifle butt to the face. She expected shouting. She expected the cruelty that Imperial Army officers had promised awaited all Japanese who surrendered to the Americans. Johnson crouched down slowly. He kept his hands visible and empty. His mother had taught him that kindness cost nothing. His father had taught him that hatred only bred more hatred. The Army had taught him Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions. Persons taking no active part in hostilities shall be treated humanely. "You can stay as long as you need," Johnson said. His voice was quiet, calm. He turned to the sentry. "Get Corporal Daniels. Tell him we need the medical tent prepared for civilian intake." He looked back at Hiroko. "Can you stand if someone helps you?" Yuki held her sister tighter. She was 16 and certain this kindness was a trap, that they would be separated, that terrible things happened to women in war regardless of which side captured them. Johnson saw the fear. He had seen it before in the faces of German prisoners in France, in the faces of Italian civilians in Sicily. Fear was the same in every language. "Private Carter," Johnson called out. A young woman in Army nurse's uniform appeared from behind the medical tent. "We need you here." The appearance of a female soldier seemed to ease something in the Japanese civilians. Women meant rules. Women meant civilization. Women meant maybe these Americans were different from what they had been told. Private Layla Carter approached with a canteen and a medical bag. She knelt beside Hiroko with the practiced efficiency of someone who had treated hundreds of wounded. She checked Hiroko's pulse, looked at her eyes, felt her forehead. "Dehydration, malnutrition, infected cuts on both feet," Carter reported. "Nothing life-threatening if we treat it now." Johnson nodded. He stood and addressed the entire group in slow, clear English. "You are now under the protection of the United States Army. You will be fed. You will receive medical treatment. You will not be harmed." Hiroko heard the words but couldn't process them. This American soldier, this black man she had been taught to fear above all others, was offering mercy. The contradiction crashed against everything she had been raised to believe. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. As Carter and another medic lifted her onto a stretcher, Hiroko's last thought before exhaustion claimed her was simple and devastating. Maybe everything had been a lie. August 14th, 1945, 1900 hours. Medical Tent 7, Camp Buckner. Hiroko woke to the smell of iodine and canvas. The medical tent was larger than her family's entire apartment in Naha. 12 cots lined each side. She occupied the one nearest the entrance. A kerosene lamp hung from the center pole. Its light cast soft shadows across the white sheets. Real sheets, not the rough military blankets she expected. The pillow under her head was stuffed with something soft. Her feet had been cleaned and bandaged. Someone had given her a clean cotton shirt that hung past her knees. Sergeant Marcus Johnson sat on a wooden stool 3 feet from her cot. He was reading a paperback book. When he noticed her eyes open, he marked his page and set it aside. "You've been asleep for 4 hours," he said. "Private Carter says you'll be fine with food and rest." Hiroko tried to sit up. Pain shot through her feet. Johnson raised a hand in a gentle stopping motion. "Don't put weight on those feet for at least 3 days," he said. "The infections need time to heal." He reached behind him and produced a metal tray. On it sat a bowl of soup, 2 pieces of white bread, an apple, and a cup of water. The smell made Hiroko's stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. "It's chicken soup," Johnson explained. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and it's real." He set the tray on a small table beside the cot and moved it within her reach. Then he stepped back, giving her space, giving her the choice to eat or not eat. The simple gesture of respect nearly broke her. Hiroko had been taught that Americans would mock Japanese prisoners, force them to debase themselves, make them beg for scraps. Instead, this man was offering her dignity along with the meal. She picked up the spoon with trembling hands. The soup was the best thing she had ever tasted. Not because of the flavor, but because of what it represented. Food given freely, kindness without conditions. The bread was soft, the apple was crisp, the water was clean. Johnson watched her eat without speaking. When she finished, he took the tray and returned with a second cup of water and 2 white pills. "Sulfa drugs," he said, "for the infections in your feet. Private Carter says to take them with water." Hiroko stared at the pills. In Japan, such medicines were reserved for soldiers, for important people, not for civilians, certainly not for defeated enemies. "Why?" The question came out in Japanese before she could stop it. Johnson seemed to understand anyway. "Because you're hurt, and we can help. That's reason enough." He pulled the stool closer and sat down again. His movements were slow, non-threatening, like approaching a wounded animal. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he said. "I'm from Alabama. That's in the southern part of America. I've been in the Pacific for 11 months. Hiroko said nothing. She didn't know what to say. The propaganda had painted American soldiers as mindless brutes. This man spoke quietly, moved carefully, treated her like she mattered. "You don't have to talk," Johnson continued. "I just thought you might want to know who's looking after you. Private Carter will be here in the morning to change your bandages. If you need anything during the night, there's an orderly at the front desk." He stood to leave, then he paused and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small wooden carving of a bird. It was crude, but clearly made with care. "My mother made this before I shipped out," he said. He placed it on the table beside the empty tray. "It's supposed to bring good luck. You can borrow it if you want." Hiroko watched him walk toward the tent entrance. Her entire worldview was crumbling. This black American soldier, the one she had been taught represented everything evil about the enemy, had just given her his mother's good luck charm. "Thank you," she said in English. The words felt inadequate. Johnson turned back and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "You're welcome, miss. Get some rest." After he left, Hiroko picked up the wooden bird. She turned it over in her hands. The wood was smooth from being carried in a pocket for months. She thought about her own mother, about the propaganda posters in school, about everything she had been told about Americans. Then she thought about the soup, the clean bandages, the medicine, the small carved bird that someone's mother had made with love. She fell asleep holding it, her certainty about the world shattered by simple kindness. August 15th, 1945. 0600 hours. Medical tent 7. Hiroko woke to the sound of activity outside, soldiers calling to each other. Trucks rumbling past, the organized chaos of a military camp coming to life. Private Layla Carter appeared beside her cot with fresh bandages and a breakfast tray. She was 23 years old, with steady hands and kind eyes. She had been a nursing student in Chicago before the war. "Morning," Carter said cheerfully. "Let's look at those feet." She unwrapped the bandages with practiced efficiency. Hiroko watched her face for signs of disgust or cruelty. She saw only professional concentration. "The infections are responding well to the sulfa drugs," Carter announced. "You'll be walking in a few days. The cuts were deep but clean, no foreign matter embedded." She applied fresh iodine. The sting made Hiroko gasp. Carter paused immediately. "I'm sorry, I know it hurts, but it prevents gangrene." The apology confused Hiroko. Enemy soldiers did not apologize to prisoners. Yet here was this American woman saying sorry for medical treatment that would save Hiroko's life. After Carter re-wrapped both feet, she handed Hiroko the breakfast tray. Oatmeal with sugar, 2 eggs, toast with butter, coffee with cream. More food than Hiroko's family had seen in a week during the final months of the war. "Eat slowly," Carter advised. "Your stomach needs time to adjust after days without food." She sat on the stool Johnson had occupied the night before. She pulled out a small notepad and pencil. "I need to record some information for the medical files, just basic things. Your name, age, where you're from. Is that okay?" The question itself was revolutionary. Is that okay? As if Hiroko had a choice, as if her opinion mattered. "Hiroko Matsumoto, 24 years old, from Naha City." Carter wrote it down. "Do you have family?" "My sister, Yuki. She is here, 16 years old." "She's fine. She's in the women's quarters with the other civilians. You can see her after you eat." Relief flooded through Hiroko. They had not been separated. Another expectation shattered. As Carter continued her questions, Hiroko felt a different kind of pain growing inside her chest. Not physical pain. Something worse. The pain of gratitude mixed with shame. These Americans were treating her with more dignity than her own government had shown its citizens in the final, desperate months. She had been raised to believe Japanese soldiers were the most honorable in the world, that American soldiers were devils without souls. Yet when Hiroko had stumbled toward that checkpoint yesterday, exhausted and afraid, it was an American who had shown mercy. A black American, whom military propaganda had painted as the lowest form of enemy soldier. The shame burned. Not shame for surrendering. Shame for believing the lies. Shame for the hatred she had carried. Shame for every propaganda poster she had looked at without question. "Are you okay?" Carter asked. You look upset." Hiroko realized tears were running down her face. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "I don't understand," she said. The words came out in broken English mixed with frustration. "You are enemy. I am enemy. Why kindness?" Carter set down her notepad. She chose her words carefully. "The war is over as of this morning. Japan has surrendered. But even if it hadn't, you're not my enemy. You're a woman who needed help. That's all that matters." The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The words should have devastated Hiroko. Instead, she felt only exhaustion. The fight was done. The nightmare was finished. But Carter's other words cut deeper. "You're not my enemy." How could this American nurse say that after everything? After Pearl Harbor, after the death marches, after all the atrocities committed in Japan's name? "My country did terrible things," Hiroko whispered. "How can you be kind?" Carter was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with the weight of someone who had thought about this question many times. "Terrible things happened on both sides. But you didn't order those things. You didn't commit those acts. You're just someone caught in a war you didn't start. Being kind to you doesn't excuse what happened. It just means I see you as a person, not as a symbol." The logic was too simple, too clean. Yet Hiroko could not argue against it. She had not ordered anything. She had simply tried to survive, just like these American soldiers were trying to survive. The shame deepened, but now it mixed with something else. A small seed of understanding. Maybe hatred was easier than this. Maybe propaganda was simpler than seeing enemies as people. Carter stood and picked up her medical bag. "I'll bring your sister to visit in an hour. Rest until then." After she left, Hiroko lay back on the clean white pillow and stared at the canvas ceiling. The wooden bird Johnson had lent her sat on the table, a gift from one person to another. Not American to Japanese, just human to human. The simplicity of that kindness hurt worse than any weapon. August 15th, 1945, 1400 hours. Medical Tent 7. Hiroko was pretending to sleep when she heard voices outside the tent. Sergeant Johnson and Corporal Daniels stood just beyond the entrance flap. They spoke in low tones, but sound carried clearly in the afternoon heat. "I still can't wrap my head around it," Daniels said. He was from Ohio, 26 years old, with the practical manner of a farmer. "The things we found in those caves. Civilians who killed themselves rather than surrender. Mothers who killed their own children." Hiroko's breath caught. She kept her eyes closed and stayed perfectly still. "The propaganda was that effective," Johnson replied. His voice carried a weight of sadness. "They were told we'd torture them, rape the women, kill the children. So death seemed like the better choice. But we haven't. We've followed the Geneva Conventions to the letter. We've treated every civilian and prisoner with respect. Why didn't they know that? Because their government lied to them, same way our government lied to us about plenty of things, just different lies." Daniels was quiet for a moment. Hiroko heard him light a cigarette. The smell of tobacco drifted into the tent. "That woman in there, the one you've been looking after, you think she believed all that?" "Probably," Johnson said. "Most people believe what they're taught. Takes a lot of courage to question it." "You question it? About the segregation back home? About how they treat us?" Johnson's laugh was bitter. "Questioning it doesn't change it. I can see the hypocrisy clear as day. We're fighting for freedom in Europe and Asia, while black folks back home can't vote in half the states, can't eat in the same restaurants, can't even use the same water fountains as white folks. That's why you're so careful with these prisoners, because you know what it's like to be seen as less than human. Maybe. Or maybe I just can't stomach adding more cruelty to a world that's already drowning in it. Daniels took a long drag on his cigarette. You think they'll change things when we get home? After all this? I'd like to believe it, but I've learned not to expect much. The same people who sent us to fight for democracy overseas will go right back to denying it to us at home. The bitterness in Johnson's voice was palpable. Hiroko had never considered that American soldiers might have their own grievances against their country. The propaganda had painted America as unified in its evil, a single mass of cruel intention. But here was evidence of something more complex. A black soldier fighting for a country that treated him as inferior. A man who understood being dehumanized by propaganda. A person caught between duty and injustice. The war's over now anyway, Daniels said. Japan surrendered this morning. We'll be processing civilians and prisoners for weeks, then shipping home. Yeah, back to Alabama where I still can't vote. Back to sitting in the colored section. Back to being called boy by men half my age. At least you'll be alive. There's that, Johnson agreed. There's always that. Their voices faded as they walked away from the tent. Hiroko opened her eyes and stared at the canvas ceiling. Her mind raced with this new information. Sergeant Johnson had been kind to her, despite facing cruelty from his own people. He had shown mercy to an enemy, while his own country denied him basic dignity. He had treated her with respect, while knowing respect would not be returned to him at home. The realization was devastating. Hiroko had believed in the righteousness of Japan's cause, in the Emperor's divine mission, in the necessity of fighting against American aggression. But if American soldiers themselves questioned their country's moral authority, if they saw the contradictions and hypocrisies, yet still chose kindness, what did that say about the propaganda she had swallowed whole? She thought about her teachers in school, the ones who had taught her that Japanese people were superior, that Americans were barbaric, that surrender meant unspeakable horrors. Every one of those teachings had been proven false in the last 24 hours. But Johnson's words revealed something more troubling. Both countries had lied to their people. Both had used propaganda to justify war. Both had committed atrocities while claiming moral superiority. The difference was that Johnson could see his country's failures and still choose compassion. Hiroko had never questioned anything until yesterday. She had accepted every government statement as truth, every poster as fact, every promise of American brutality as inevitable reality. Now she was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. If she had been lied to about the Americans, what else had been a lie? And if this black soldier could show mercy to his enemies despite suffering injustice from his own people, what excuse did she have for her hatred? The wooden bird on the table seemed to watch her with its carved eyes, a gift from a man who understood being seen as less than human, a kindness from someone who had every reason to be cruel. Hiroko picked up the bird and held it close. The shame she felt now was different from before. This was not shame for surrendering. This was shame for never asking the right questions, for accepting easy answers, for believing hatred was simpler than understanding. The war might be over, but Hiroko's personal battle with everything she had been taught was just beginning. August 16th, 1945, 10:00 hours. Camp Buckner Mess Hall. Private Carter had cleared Hiroko to move around on crutches. The infected cuts on her feet were healing faster than expected. Walking still hurt, but staying in bed felt worse. Yuki helped her sister navigate the short distance from the medical tent to the mess hall. The younger girl had adjusted better to captivity than Hiroko expected. Maybe 16 was young enough to adapt quickly. Or maybe Yuki had never believed the propaganda as deeply. The mess hall was a large tent with long wooden tables and benches. Japanese civilians sat separate from American soldiers, not because of rules, but because of mutual uncertainty. Neither group quite knew how to bridge the gap between enemy and human. Hiroko and Yuki took seats at the end of a table occupied by 3 other Japanese women. The food was simple: rice, vegetables, fish. More than adequate. More than they had seen in months. Sergeant Johnson entered the mess hall carrying his own tray. He spotted Hiroko and walked over. Several soldiers watched him with mild curiosity. The civilians watched with fear poorly masked as politeness. "Mind if I sit?" Johnson asked. Hiroko's first instinct was to say yes, she minded very much. Having an American soldier at their table felt wrong, exposed, like admitting defeat in some way beyond military surrender. But she thought about the wooden bird still tucked in her shirt pocket, about the conversation she had overheard yesterday, about kindness given without conditions. "Okay," she said quietly. Johnson sat across from her. He ate in silence for a few minutes. The other women at the table found reasons to leave. Soon it was just Hiroko, Yuki, and Johnson. "How are your feet?" he asked. "Better. Private Carter says I can walk without crutches in 3 days." "That's good news." An awkward silence fell. Hiroko wanted to say something but did not know what. "Thank you" felt insufficient. "I'm sorry" felt presumptuous. She settled on a question. "Where is Alabama?" Johnson seemed surprised by the question. "It's in the south. Hot most of the year. Lots of farms and small towns." "Like Okinawa?" "Maybe a little. Except Alabama has segregation laws. That means black people and white people can't share the same spaces. Different schools, different restaurants, different everything." Yuki looked confused. Hiroko struggled to understand the concept. "But you are all American," Hiroko said. "How can you be separate?" Johnson set down his fork. His expression was complicated, tired but patient. "That's a good question. My people have been asking it for a long time. The answer we get is complicated, and usually boils down to racism. The belief that some people are inherently better than others based on skin color." The words struck Hiroko like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what she had been taught? That Japanese people were superior? That other Asian peoples were lesser? That Americans were barbaric? "I heard you talking yesterday," Hiroko admitted. "Outside medical tent. You said you fight for country that treats you badly." Johnson nodded slowly. "I did say that. And it's true." "Why fight then?" "Because the alternative was worse. Hitler wanted to exterminate entire groups of people. Your government wanted to conquer all of Asia. At least America has the possibility of change. That possibility is worth fighting for." He paused and looked directly at Hiroko. His eyes were serious, but not unkind. "I know what it's like to be told you're less than human. To have laws that say you don't deserve the same rights as other people. To be judged not by who you are, but by what you look like. That's why I try to treat everyone with dignity, even former enemies. Maybe especially former enemies. Hiroko felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. "We were taught Americans would kill us," she said quietly. "Especially black soldiers. The propaganda said you were the most dangerous." Johnson's expression darkened with understanding. "They dehumanized me twice. Once to make you fear me. Once to justify discrimination at home. That's efficient hatred." The observation was so precise and painful that Hiroko could not respond. Johnson was right. The same propaganda that had made her fear him had probably made life harder for him in America. Her fear and his oppression were connected by the same lies. "My mother is dead," Hiroko said suddenly. The words came out before she could stop them. "She died in the firebombing of Tokyo. My father died at Saipan. I came to Okinawa with Yuki because we had nowhere else to go." Johnson's face softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry. That's a lot of loss." "Your mother made the bird. The wooden bird you gave me. Is she alive?" "Yes. She lives in Montgomery with my younger brother. I write to her every week." "You are lucky." "I am," Johnson agreed, "though she worries every day until she gets my letters." Hiroko pulled the carved bird from her pocket and set it on the table between them. "You should keep it. For luck. To go home to her." Johnson pushed it gently back toward Hiroko. "You keep it. I'll get home when I get home. Maybe it'll bring you luck figuring out what comes next." What came next? Hiroko had not thought beyond surviving each day, beyond eating, beyond healing. But Johnson was right. Eventually, she would have to leave this camp, return to a Japan destroyed by war, figure out how to live in a world where everything she believed had been proven false. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "Nobody does," Johnson said. "But you're young. You survived. That's more than a lot of people can say. The rest you figure out as you go." He stood and picked up his tray. Before leaving, he looked at both sisters with something like respect. "You both showed courage coming here. That fear you felt was real. You pushed through it anyway. That's worth remembering when things get hard." After he left, Yuki picked up the wooden bird and examined it closely. "He's different from what they told us," she said. Hiroko watched Johnson walk away, watched him stop to talk with Corporal Daniels, watched him laugh at something another soldier said, watched him exist as a complete person rather than a propaganda caricature. "Yes," Hiroko agreed. "Everything is different from what they told us." She took the bird back from Yuki and returned it to her pocket. A small carved reminder that the world was more complicated than she had been taught. That enemies could show mercy. That kindness could come from unexpected places. That maybe, just maybe, there was hope in rebuilding from ashes. The war was over, but Hiroko's education in what it meant to be human had just begun. August 17th, 1945, 0700 hours. Camp Buckner, Central Kitchen. Hiroko reported for her first work assignment with bandaged feet still tender but healing. Private Carter had cleared her for light duty, standing work only, no heavy lifting. The camp needed extra hands processing the influx of Japanese civilians. Over 200 people had surrendered in the past week. They needed feeding. The kitchen was understaffed. Hiroko had volunteered before anyone asked. Corporal William Hayes ran the kitchen. He was 42 years old, too old for combat duty but perfect for logistics. He had managed a restaurant in Detroit before the war. Now he managed feeding 3,000 soldiers and 200 civilians 3 times a day. "You ever work a kitchen?" Hayes asked through Private Tanaka, a Japanese-American translator from Hawaii. "No," Hiroko admitted. "But I can learn." Hayes nodded. "Fair enough. Start with vegetable prep. Tanaka will show you." The work was simple but constant. Potatoes needed peeling, carrots needed cutting, onions needed chopping. Her hands moved through repetitive motions while her mind wandered. Sergeant Johnson appeared around 9 in the morning. He was on duty supervising civilian workers. He walked through the kitchen, checking assignments, making notes on a clipboard, ensuring everyone understood their tasks. He paused at Hiroko's station. "How are the feet holding up?" "Sore, but okay," she said. She kept her eyes on the carrots. Making eye contact still felt too intimate, too much like acknowledging the friendship growing between them. "Take breaks when you need them. Nobody expects miracles on your 3rd day out of bed." He moved on to check other workers. But Hiroko noticed something. The other soldiers treated Johnson with respect, bordering on admiration. They asked his opinion on small matters, sought his advice on handling civilian concerns, deferred to his judgment, even when he held no official authority over them. This confused her. The propaganda had taught that black soldiers were treated as inferiors by white soldiers, that they were given the worst jobs and denied respect. Yet here was Johnson being consulted like a valued leader. During lunch break, Hiroko sat with 3 other Japanese women in the shade outside the kitchen. They ate rice and vegetables while watching American soldiers eat at nearby tables. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The Americans laughed freely. They teased each other with casual affection. They spoke without fear of saying the wrong thing. They moved through their world with confidence that came from knowing they were valued. Hiroko's unit in Japan had never been like that. There had been rigid hierarchy, constant fear of punishment for minor infractions, the sense that soldiers were expendable parts in a machine. "They treat each other like family," one of the women observed. Her name was Keiko. She had taught school in Shuri before the invasion. "Maybe that is how they won," another woman said. Her name was Fumiko. She had lost her husband at Iwo Jima. "Not with better weapons, with better spirit." The observation stung because it felt true. Japanese military culture had valued obedience over initiative, sacrifice over survival, dying gloriously over living effectively. These American soldiers valued each other's lives. They built each other up rather than tearing each other down. In the afternoon, Corporal Daniels came through the kitchen carrying boxes of supplies. He worked alongside Hiroko and the other civilians without hesitation. No sense that the work was beneath him. No indication that helping former enemies diminished him somehow. "You settling in okay?" he asked Hiroko while stacking canned goods. "Yes, thank you." "Johnson says you're a hard worker. That's high praise from him. He doesn't compliment people unless he means it." Hiroko felt unexpected pride at the second-hand compliment, then felt shame for feeling proud. She was supposed to be a defeated enemy, not someone seeking approval from American soldiers. But the shame felt hollow now, automatic, a leftover response from beliefs that no longer fit her lived experience. "Sergeant Johnson is kind," she said carefully. "Different from what we were taught." Daniels laughed without mockery. "Yeah, propaganda does that. Makes enemies into monsters. Makes it easier to fight them. Problem is, you eventually meet the actual people and realize they're just people." He finished stacking the supplies and looked at Hiroko directly. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "Marcus is a good man. One of the best I've served with. He's been through things that would have broken most people. Came out the other side still believing in decency. That takes strength most folks don't have. After he left, Hiroko thought about those words. Strength to remain decent. She had always thought strength meant enduring hardship without complaint, dying bravely for the emperor, sacrificing everything for the nation. But maybe real strength was harder. Maybe real strength was choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier, showing mercy when hatred would be justified, treating enemies as humans when propaganda said they were monsters. At the end of her shift, Hayes approached through Tanaka. "You did good work today. Come back tomorrow if your feet can handle it." Walking back to the civilian quarters with Yuki, Hiroko felt a strange new emotion. Not happiness, exactly. Not pride. Something quieter, but more sustaining. The satisfaction of useful work. Of contributing rather than just consuming. Of being part of something rather than separate from it. "You smiled today," Yuki observed. "I heard you laugh when that soldier dropped the pot of soup." Hiroko had not realized she had laughed. The moment had felt natural. The soldier's exaggerated distress at the spilled soup had been genuinely funny. She had responded without thinking. "Is it wrong?" Hiroko asked. "To laugh? To feel almost normal?" Yuki was quiet for a moment. Then she said something wise beyond her 16 years. "Maybe feeling normal is how we survive. Maybe that is its own kind of victory." That night, Hiroko lay in her cot, holding the wooden bird Johnson had lent her. She thought about the day's small normalcies, peeling vegetables, sharing lunch, laughing at spilled soup. Simple human moments that felt revolutionary precisely because they were shared with former enemies. The transformation Carter had mentioned was happening whether Hiroko wanted it or not. Each kind gesture eroded her certainty. Each moment of ordinary humanity made her old beliefs harder to maintain. She was becoming someone new, someone who could see Americans as people, someone who questioned what she had been taught, someone who laughed while working alongside her former enemies. The woman she had been 3 days ago would not recognize who she was becoming, and Hiroko was not sure yet how she felt about that. August 18th, 1945, 1400 hours. Camp Buckner Recreation Area. The Americans had set up a makeshift recreation space between the barracks and the motor pool. Volleyball nets, a basketball hoop made from a barrel rim, wooden benches under canvas awnings for shade. Hiroko had come to find Yuki and found instead an unexpected scene. American soldiers and Japanese civilians playing volleyball together. Not organized competition, just casual recreation on a Saturday afternoon. Sergeant Johnson was there, so was Private Carter, Corporal Daniels, a dozen others whose names Hiroko was learning, and, mixed among them, were Japanese civilians, young men, a few women, even some children who had survived the caves. "Come play," Carter called out when she spotted Hiroko. "We need another player to even the teams." Hiroko's instinct was to refuse. Playing games with American soldiers felt wrong somehow, too familiar, too much like forgetting who they were to each other. But Yuki was already on one of the teams. Her sister looked happier than Hiroko had seen her in months, laughing, moving freely, being young in a way the war had stolen from her. "I don't know how to play," Hiroko said. "Neither do half the people here," Johnson replied. He was keeping score with a piece of chalk on a wooden board. "We're making up rules as we go. It's more about fun than winning." The word fun seemed foreign. Hiroko could not remember the last time she had done something purely for enjoyment.
Everything in the past year had been about survival, about making it through another day, another air raid, another shortage. She took her place on the team opposite Yuki. The rules were indeed being improvised. The ball was actual volleyball, but half deflated. The net sagged in the middle. Players rotated with no clear pattern. Nobody kept track of proper scoring. What struck Hiroko most was the casual physical proximity. Americans and Japanese moving in the same space without fear or hostility, bumping into each other accidentally and laughing about it, high-fiving after good plays, groaning together over mistakes. During one play, Hiroko jumped for the ball and collided with Daniels. They both went down in the sand. Her immediate reaction was panic. She had touched an American soldier. He would be angry. There would be consequences. Instead, Daniels laughed and helped her up. "Nice try. Almost had it," Johnson called from the sideline. "That's a do-over. Nobody got hurt, so we pretend it didn't happen." The game continued. Hiroko's team lost badly, but nobody seemed to care about the score. The point was the playing, the movement,
the brief escape from the weight of war and defeat. After the game, people gathered under the awnings for water and conversation. Hiroko found herself sitting between Carter and a Japanese woman named Akiko, who had been a nurse in Naha. "This is strange," Akiko said quietly in Japanese. "Playing games with them, like we are friends." Carter did not understand the words, but seemed to sense the tone. "Everything okay?" Hiroko translated. "She says it feels strange, playing together, being friendly." Carter nodded thoughtfully. "It is strange. But maybe strange is better than hostile. Maybe this is how we start learning to live in the same world again." Johnson approached with cups of water for everyone. He handed them out without ceremony. Equal treatment. No hierarchy of victor and defeated. "My mother used to say that breaking bread together makes strangers into neighbors," Johnson said. He had overheard Carter's comment. "Maybe playing games does the same thing. Hard to hate someone after you've laughed with them." "Your mother sounds wise," Hiroko said. "She is. Raised 4 boys by herself after my father died. Taught us that kindness costs nothing, and hatred costs everything." He sat down on the bench nearby. His posture was relaxed, open, the opposite of threatening. "You know what the hardest part of this job is?" he asked. Nobody answered, so he continued. "Remembering that everyone here has lost something. You lost your country's war, lost family, lost your homes. We won the war, but we lost friends, lost innocence, lost the belief that the world makes sense." The observation was more philosophical than Hiroko expected from a soldier. She had assumed military men thought in simple terms, orders and obedience, victory and defeat. But Johnson saw complexity. "Nobody walks away from war undamaged," he continued. "The best we can do is try to build something better from the pieces. That starts with seeing each other as people instead of uniforms." Daniels appeared with a basketball. "Who wants to try this? Fair warning, I'm terrible at it." What followed was chaos. The game of basketball required more skill than anyone present possessed. The ball bounced in unexpected directions. Shots missed the barrel rim entirely. Players ran into each other constantly. But the laughter was genuine. The frustration was shared. The occasional success was celebrated by everyone, regardless of team. Hiroko found herself laughing until her sides hurt. Yuki was bent over, gasping with giggles after Daniels tripped over his own feet. Even Akiko, who had been so uncertain earlier, was smiling.
As the sun began setting, people drifted away to evening duties and dinner. Hiroko stayed on the bench with Johnson. The recreation area emptied until it was just the two of them. "Thank you," Hiroko said. "For today. For all of this." "You don't have to thank me for treating you like a person. That should be the baseline." "But it is not. Not always. Not in war."
Johnson was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke with careful honesty. "You're right. War brings out the worst in people. I've seen Americans do terrible things that still haunt me. I've heard stories about what Japanese soldiers did that make me sick. War turns humans into monsters." He looked at Hiroko directly. "But we don't have to stay monsters. The war is over. We get to choose who we become next. I choose to be someone who sees your humanity, who treats you with dignity, who helps build bridges instead of walls." The words settled over Hiroko like a blanket, comforting and challenging at the same time. "I was taught to hate you," she admitted. "Taught that Americans were evil, that black soldiers were the most dangerous, that surrender meant death or worse. And now? Now I think maybe I was taught many lies, and unlearning them is harder than learning them was." Johnson smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in weeks. Unlearning hatred is hard work, but it's the only work worth doing." As they walked back toward the main camp, Hiroko felt something shift inside her. Not a dramatic revelation, just a quiet acceptance that the world was different than she had believed, and that different might eventually become better. August 19th, 1945. 1000 hours. Camp Buckner Supply Depot. Hiroko's new assignment was inventory work. The supply depot handled everything from ammunition to toothpaste. Her job was recording incoming shipments and organizing supplies on shelves. The work was tedious, but Hiroko preferred it. Numbers did not require language. Organization followed universal logic. She could be useful without constant translation. Private James Walsh ran the depot. He was 20 years old, from Boston. Before the war, he had worked in his father's hardware store. He treated the military supply system like an elaborate puzzle he was determined to solve perfectly. "Everything has a place," Walsh explained through Tanaka. "Everything gets counted twice. Nothing goes missing on my watch." The depot revealed American abundance in stark detail. Shelves stacked with canned food stretching 50 feet, pallets of medical supplies that could stock a hospital, boxes of soap and toothpaste and razor blades. More material wealth than Hiroko had seen in her entire life concentrated in one building. "Where does it all come from?" she asked Walsh during a break. "America. Factories running 24 hours a day. Ships bringing supplies from California and Texas. The whole country working to support us out here." The scale was incomprehensible. Japan had scraped together supplies, rationed everything, sent soldiers into battle with minimal equipment. Meanwhile, America had been drowning its military in abundance. Johnson appeared around noon. He was conducting routine inspections, making sure supplies were properly secured, that civilian workers were being treated fairly, that regulations were being followed. He found Hiroko organizing boxes of soap on a high shelf. She was standing on a ladder. Her bandaged feet made balance difficult. "Should you be up there?" Johnson asked, concern clear in his voice. "The boxes need to go somewhere. I can do it." "Doesn't mean you should. Walsh, get someone else for the high shelves. Matsumoto's feet aren't healed enough for ladder work." Walsh immediately reassigned Hiroko to ground-level inventory. The casual concern struck her again. Johnson had no obligation to worry about her well-being. She was just another civilian worker. Yet he noticed. He cared. He acted. During lunch, Johnson sat with Hiroko outside the depot. They ate standard rations: rice, vegetables, canned meat. Nothing special. But eaten together, it felt significant. "Tell me about Alabama," Hiroko said. The question surprised her as much as him. But she wanted to know. Wanted to understand who this man was beyond his uniform. Johnson was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. Alabama is beautiful and terrible at the same time. Gorgeous countryside, good people, but also segregation, Jim Crow laws, violence against black folks who step out of line. What are Jim Crow laws? Laws that keep black people separate from white people. Separate schools, separate restaurants, separate water fountains, even separate seating on buses. Born from slavery, maintained by fear and hatred. Hiroko struggled to comprehend. But you fight for America. How can you fight for a country with such laws? That's the question I ask myself every day. The answer I've settled on is complicated. I fight because the alternative is worse. Hitler wanted to exterminate Jews and anyone else he considered inferior. Your government wanted to conquer all of Asia. At least America has the possibility of change built into its foundation. He paused and looked at her directly. I fight for the America that could be, not the America that is. I fight hoping that my service will help create a country that actually lives up to its promises, that recognizes my humanity and the humanity of people who look like me. The idealism in his words was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He was fighting for a dream rather than a reality, hoping his sacrifice would create something better for future generations. That is brave, Hiroko said. Braver than dying in battle, believing in something that does not exist yet. Or maybe it's just stubborn hope. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Johnson spoke again. This time, his voice carried a different weight. Can I ask you something personal? Yes. What do you want to do? After all this, when you go back to Japan, what kind of life do you imagine? The question paralyzed Hiroko. She had not allowed herself to think about the future. The present was overwhelming enough, but Johnson waited patiently for an answer. I don't know, she admitted. Everything I knew is gone. My parents, my home, my country's honor. I have no training for work, no prospects. Yuki is my only family. I cannot imagine what comes next. You're smart, hardworking, you learn fast. Those things matter more than training. In Japan, women have few opportunities, especially now. Especially defeated women who surrendered to the enemy. Johnson nodded slowly. He understood the implications. The world is changing. The war changed everything. Maybe it created space for new possibilities, for people to build lives that weren't available before. Or maybe it just destroyed the old world without replacing it with anything better. Maybe both, Johnson conceded. Maybe that's what makes this moment so important. We get to help shape what comes next. The choices we make now about how to treat each other will echo for decades. The responsibility in those words felt enormous. Hiroko was just one person, One defeated Japanese woman trying to survive. How could her choices matter in reshaping the world? But looking at Johnson, she understood. His choice to show kindness mattered. His decision to see her humanity influenced how she saw Americans. His small acts of mercy were ripples spreading outward. Maybe she could create ripples too. Maybe treating former enemies with respect would influence how others behaved. Maybe choosing understanding over hatred would help build something better from the ruins. "I will try," Hiroko said, "to make good choices, to see people as people, to build bridges like you said." Johnson smiled. It was the first time she had seen him look genuinely happy. That's all any of us can do. Try, and keep trying, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They returned to work. Hiroko spent the afternoon organizing supplies and thinking about futures that might be possible, about worlds that did not exist yet but could be built through small, daily choices. The wooden bird in her pocket felt heavier now, not with weight, but with meaning. A symbol of connection across enemy lines. A promise that kindness could survive war. A hope that understanding could replace hatred. August 20th, 1945, 1900 hours. Camp Buckner Mess Hall. The evening meal service had ended. Civilians and soldiers had dispersed to recreation or rest. Hiroko remained behind helping with cleanup. She had volunteered for extra duty. Keeping busy prevented thinking too much. Johnson entered the mess hall carrying a wooden box. He spotted Hiroko and waved her over. "I have something for the civilians. Thought you might help distribute it." The box contained letters. Mail from Japan had finally started arriving through Red Cross channels. Names were called. People claimed envelopes with shaking hands. Some wept at seeing familiar handwriting. Others stared at letters from dead relatives, words written before the end. "Hiroko Matsumoto," Johnson called. She froze. She had written to no one, expected nothing. Her parents were dead. She had no other relatives who knew where she was. Johnson handed her a thin envelope. The return address was from Montgomery, Alabama. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The name read, Margaret Johnson. "Your mother?" Hiroko asked. Johnson looked embarrassed. "I wrote to her about you and your sister, about the civilians here. She wanted to send something." Hiroko opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a short letter written in English and a pressed flower. The letter read, "Dear Hiroko, my son Marcus writes that you are far from home and family. I know that pain. I know what it means to feel lost. Please accept this small token. The flower is a magnolia from our yard. In our family it symbolizes strength and perseverance. You have both. You survived war. You chose life over death. That takes courage. I pray you find peace and purpose in whatever comes next. You are in my thoughts. Margaret Johnson." The kindness from a stranger on the other side of the world overwhelmed Hiroko. She held the pressed flower like it was made of glass. This woman did not know her, had no obligation to her. Yet she had taken time to write, to send this gift, to offer comfort. "I cannot accept this," Hiroko whispered. "It is too much." "She wanted you to have it," Johnson said gently. "My mother believes kindness should always be given freely, especially to those who need it most." Hiroko looked at the pressed magnolia. Such a simple thing, just a dried flower. But it represented something profound. The possibility of connection across oceans and enemies. The choice to see shared humanity rather than national identity. "Thank you," she said. "Please tell your mother thank you." "You can tell her yourself if you want. She'd love to receive a letter from you." The idea of corresponding with an American woman in Alabama seemed surreal, yet also strangely right. Building bridges one letter at a time. Later that evening, Hiroko and Johnson sat outside the mess hall. The camp was quiet. Soldiers on duty walked patrols. Night insects chirped. A warm breeze carried the smell of ocean salt. "Tell me about your mother," Hiroko said. "What kind of woman writes to enemy strangers?" Johnson smiled. "She's remarkable. Raised 4 sons alone after my father died from pneumonia. He was a sharecropper. We were poor. But my mother made sure we had food and education. She cleaned houses for white families, took in washing, did whatever necessary to keep us together." "That is strength," Hiroko observed. "She's the strongest person I know. She taught us that dignity comes from how you treat others, not from how others treat you. That kindness is a choice you make regardless of circumstances." "You learned well." Johnson shrugged. "I try. Don't always succeed. But I keep trying, because she would be disappointed if I gave up." Hiroko thought about her own mother, the lessons she had been taught: loyalty to emperor, duty to nation, honor through sacrifice. All important values, but perhaps incomplete without compassion for outsiders. "My mother taught me duty," Hiroko said, "but not mercy. Not seeing enemies as human. I think maybe her lessons were missing something important. Or maybe war made it impossible to teach those lessons. Hard to preach mercy when your country is fighting for survival." The generosity in his interpretation surprised Hiroko. He could have condemned Japanese militarism, criticized the propaganda. Instead, he offered understanding. "Tell me about growing up in Alabama," Hiroko said. "What was it like?" Johnson's expression grew complex, pride and pain mixing together. "Complicated. We had a good community, black folks looking out for each other, sharing what little we had, strong churches, family bonds, but always the shadow of segregation. Always knowing you were considered less than, that white folks could hurt you without consequences." "How did you survive that? Without becoming bitter?" "Who says I'm not bitter?" Johnson replied, but he smiled to soften it. "I'm angry about injustice, about wasted potential, about artificial barriers. But my mother taught me that bitterness is poison you drink hoping it hurts someone else. So I channel anger into action, into trying to be the change I want to see." The wisdom in his words struck Hiroko deeply. This man had every reason to be cruel, to pass along the hatred directed at him. Instead, he chose differently. "I was bitter," Hiroko admitted. "When my mother died, when my father died, when our country lost. I wanted to hate Americans for destroying everything. But then you showed kindness. And now I am confused about what to feel." "Feel whatever you feel. Emotions don't have to make sense. You lost everything. Being angry is normal. Being sad is normal. Feeling grateful for kindness is also normal. All those feelings can exist together." The permission to feel complicated emotions was liberating. Hiroko had been trying to organize her feelings into neat categories: acceptable versus unacceptable, loyal versus traitorous. But maybe emotions were messier than that. They sat in silence for a while. Then Johnson asked quietly, "What do you miss most about before?" Hiroko did not have to think. "My mother's voice. The way she sang while cooking. Small things. Ordinary moments I took for granted." "My father used to whittle. Made little animals from scrap wood. I wish I had kept more of them. At the time, they seemed like clutter. Now they would be treasures. The shared experience of loss created connection. Both had lost parents. Both carried regret for not appreciating small moments. Both understood that war stole not just lives, but all the ordinary beauty that made life worth living. "Will you stay in the army after the war?" Hiroko asked. "No. I'll go home. Help my mother. Maybe use the GI Bill to get education. Try to make something of myself despite Alabama's best efforts to keep me down." "You will succeed. You are too stubborn not to." Johnson laughed. "That's probably true. Stubbornness is a family trait." As the evening grew late, they walked back toward the civilian quarters. At the entrance, Johnson paused. "Thank you for today, for helping with the mail, for the conversation, for seeing me as a person and not just a uniform." "Thank you for the same," Hiroko replied. She held up the envelope from his mother. "And for this. It means more than you know." After he left, Hiroko lay in her cot holding the pressed magnolia and the wooden bird. Two gifts from two people who had chosen kindness over hatred, who had built bridges over divisions. She thought about Johnson's mother working multiple jobs to raise 4 sons, about her own mother singing while cooking, about all the ordinary heroism of women trying to hold families together during impossible times. Maybe that was where real strength lived. Not in grand military victories, not in dying gloriously, but in choosing compassion daily, in maintaining humanity despite circumstances designed to strip it away. August 21st, 1945, 1400 hours. Camp Buckner Education Tent. The Americans had established basic education services for civilians, English lessons, information about post-war Japan, skills training for eventual repatriation. Hiroko attended her first English class. 20 Japanese civilians sat on wooden benches. Private Daniel Kim, a Korean-American translator from Los Angeles, taught from a makeshift chalkboard. "English will be important for rebuilding," Kim explained in Japanese. "American occupation forces will need translators. Businesses will need people who can communicate. This skill will give you opportunities." The pragmatism appealed to Hiroko. Learning English was not betrayal. It was survival. A tool for navigating the world that would exist after this war. Johnson appeared halfway through the lesson. He was not teaching, but observing, making sure civilian education programs were running properly. He sat in the back and listened. After class, he approached Hiroko with a question that surprised her. "Would you be willing to help with something? We need Japanese civilians to help prepare educational materials for other camps, information about American customs, translation work. You have good English already, better than most." The request felt significant. Being asked to contribute rather than just consume, to help shape how former enemies understood each other. "I will help," Hiroko said. "What do you need?" "Come with me." He led her to a small office tent. Inside were stacks of pamphlets, forms, and educational materials, all in English, all needing translation or cultural context. Corporal Daniels was there, so was Private Carter. They were trying to create a guidebook for civilians being repatriated to Japan. Information about occupation policies, rights under Allied authority, where to seek help. "We keep running into cultural misunderstandings," Daniels explained. "We need someone who knows both worlds, someone who can explain American intentions in ways Japanese civilians will understand." The work was complex. How do you explain democracy to people raised under imperial authority? How do you translate concepts like individual rights to a culture built on collective harmony? Hiroko worked through the afternoon with the small team. They debated word choices, discussed cultural implications, tried to find bridges between vastly different worldviews. During a break, Carter asked a question that had clearly been bothering her. How do we explain that we're not here to punish you, that occupation isn't about revenge but rebuilding? Every draft we write sounds patronizing or dishonest. Hiroko thought carefully. Tell truth. Say America won war. Say Japan must accept occupation. But also say you will treat us with dignity, that you want to help rebuild, that you see future partnership, not permanent enemy. Will people believe that? Daniels asked. Some will, some will not. But hearing it said clearly is better than uncertainty. The work revealed how much understanding required effort from both sides. Americans trying to explain their intentions, Japanese trying to trust former enemies. Everyone attempting to build something new from the wreckage of war. As evening approached, Johnson walked Hiroko back to the civilian quarters. They moved slowly. Her feet still hurt after long days standing. He matched her pace without comment. You did good work today, Johnson said. The materials will help thousands of people. It felt good, being useful, contributing. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Hiroko asked something that had been troubling her. What happens when we leave? When civilians are sent back to Japan? Will we forget this? Will everything return to how it was before? Johnson stopped walking. He turned to face her with unusual intensity. That depends on what we choose. We can let this become just a strange chapter in a terrible war, or we can let it change us. Let it prove that enemies can become friends, that understanding is possible even after horrible violence. But I will be in Japan. You will be in Alabama. We may never see each other again. Probably true, Johnson admitted. But that doesn't make this time meaningless. You've taught me that compassion can survive war. I've hopefully taught you that not all enemies are monsters. Those lessons stay with us, influence how we treat others, how we build the future. The thought of leaving felt suddenly unbearable. Not romantic feelings, something different. The grief of losing a friendship that had taught her to see the world differently. I will miss you, Hiroko said. Simple truth. I'll miss you too. But I'm grateful we met. Grateful for these conversations. Grateful you trusted me enough to see past the uniform. They continued walking. The camp felt both familiar and temporary. Soon, this strange interlude would end. Hiroko would return to a destroyed Japan. Johnson would return to a segregated Alabama. Both would carry memories of time when enemies chose understanding over hatred. At the entrance to civilian quarters, Johnson pulled out a small notebook and pencil. He wrote something down and handed the paper to Hiroko. My mother's address in Montgomery. If you want to write to her. If you want to stay in touch. I'd like to know how your life turns out. What you build from all this. Hiroko took the paper like it was precious. An address in Alabama. A connection to a world she would never have known without this war. I will write, she promised. To your mother. Maybe to you, if that is okay. More than okay. I'd like that very much. After he left, Hiroko sat on her cot and looked at the address. Such a small thing. A few lines of writing. But it represented possibility. The chance that connections forged in war could survive into peace. Yuki appeared and sat beside her sister. You like him, Yuki observed. Not accusatory, just stating fact. As a friend, Hiroko clarified. He has shown me that enemies are not what we were taught. That is important. Will you be sad when he leaves? Yes, but also grateful we met. Some people teach you things that change everything. He is one of those people. Yuki leaned against her sister's shoulder. They sat together in silence. Two survivors trying to imagine a future that did not yet exist, carrying memories of kindness that would shape how they built their lives from ruins. August 23rd, 1945, 2100 hours, Camp Buckner perimeter. The night was unusually quiet. Most soldiers were off duty. Civilians had settled into their quarters. Hiroko was walking back from the latrines when the first shots rang out. The sound was sharp and close. Rifle fire from the eastern perimeter. Then shouting in Japanese, confused orders in English. The camp alarm began wailing. Hiroko froze in the open space between buildings. Her body remembered what her mind tried to forget. Air raids, artillery, the caves of Okinawa. Fear flooded back instantly. More shots, closer now. She could see muzzle flashes near the fence line. Someone was shooting into the camp. Japanese holdouts who had refused surrender. They attacked camps occasionally. Desperate final acts of defiance. "Get down!" The voice was American, urgent. She dropped to the ground as bullets snapped overhead. Soldiers were running everywhere, taking defensive positions, returning fire. The civilian quarters were directly in the line of fire. Hiroko could hear women screaming inside, children crying. Yuki was in there. She started crawling toward the building, had to reach her sister, had to protect her. The shooting intensified. Dirt kicked up near her hands. Something hot grazed her shoulder. Not a direct hit, just close. Then Johnson was there, running across open ground toward her. He had no helmet, no weapon, just running toward danger because she was in it. "Stay down!" he shouted. He reached her and covered her body with his. His weight pressed her flat against the ground. She could feel his heartbeat through his chest, fast but steady. His arms wrapped around her head protectively. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the ground where she had been crawling seconds earlier. If Johnson had not reached her, if he had not covered her, those bullets would have killed her. The firefight continued above them. Johnson did not move, did not try to escape to safety. He stayed there, shielding an enemy civilian with his own body, making himself the target so she would not be. "Yuki," Hiroko gasped. "My sister, inside." "Daniels has the civilians," Johnson said. His voice was calm despite the chaos. "They're taking them to the storm shelter. She's safe." More soldiers arrived. They established a defensive perimeter around the exposed area. The shooting began to die down. The Japanese attackers were either dead or retreating. Within 5 minutes, it was over. Johnson slowly lifted himself off Hiroko. He helped her sit up. His hands checked her for injuries with practiced efficiency. "You're bleeding," he said. He examined her shoulder where the near miss had torn fabric and scraped skin. "It is nothing. You saved my life." Anyone would have done the same. But Hiroko knew that was not true. Not anyone. Not in war. Not for an enemy. He had run toward danger without hesitation, had placed himself between her and bullets, had chosen her life over his own safety. The full weight of it crashed over her. This black American soldier, the one she had been taught to fear most, had just proven willing to die for her. A Japanese woman, a former enemy, someone he owed nothing. All her propaganda training, all her beliefs about American cruelty, all her certainty about racial hierarchies, none of it could survive this moment, this act of selfless protection from someone who had every reason to let her die.
Carter appeared with a medical bag. She began treating Hiroko's shoulder while Johnson coordinated with other soldiers. The camp returned to order quickly, professionals doing their jobs. But Hiroko could not stop shaking. Not from fear now, from revelation. From understanding, finally and completely, that everything she had believed was wrong. That enemies could love across battle lines. That compassion could survive war. That one person's courage could change another person's entire worldview. Johnson returned after checking the perimeter. He crouched beside her with concern clear on his face. "You okay? Not just the shoulder, really okay?" Hiroko looked at him. This man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had shared his mother's letters, who had treated her with dignity, who had just risked his life to save hers. "You could have died," she whispered. "For me. Why?" Johnson's answer was simple, direct, the truest thing she had ever heard. "Because your life matters.
Because you're a person who deserves protection. Because that's what decent people do. They protect those who need protecting." The tears came then, not from pain, from the shattering of everything false inside her, from grief for wasted hatred, from gratitude for undeserved mercy, from love for this imperfect world where enemies could become friends through simple acts of courage. "Thank you," she said, inadequate words for an unpayable debt. Johnson smiled gently. "You're welcome. Now let's get you somewhere safe." As he helped her stand, Hiroko knew she was forever changed. She could never return to who she had been, never see the world through propaganda's lies, never hate blindly again. This moment had rewritten her understanding of humanity, and she would carry it for the rest of her life. August 28, 1945, 0900 hours, Camp Buckner, Administration Building. The orders came through official channels. All Japanese civilians would be repatriated to Japan within 2 weeks. Ships were being prepared. Departure schedules posted. The temporary refuge was ending. Hiroko stood outside the administration building reading the notice in Japanese and English. Her name appeared on the manifest for September 8th. 2 weeks to prepare for a return to a country she barely recognized anymore. Johnson found her there an hour later. He was carrying a folder of paperwork, official duties that seemed trivial compared to what they both knew was coming. "Goodbye." "You saw the notice," he said, not a question. "Yes, September 8th. I will return to Japan." They walked away from the crowded building, found a quiet spot under trees near the perimeter fence. The same fence where bullets had flown 5 days earlier, where Johnson had covered her body with his own, where everything had changed. "Are you ready?" Johnson asked. "To go back?" "No, but ready does not matter. I must go. Yuki needs to go home, whatever home means now." Japan was destroyed. Cities burned, economy collapsed, millions dead. The emperor had surrendered unconditionally. American occupation forces were already landing. Everything Hiroko had known was gone. She would be returning to a country she no longer understood, filled with people who would not understand her. "What will you tell them?" Johnson asked carefully. "About this place. About what happened here." The question struck at Hiroko's deepest fear. How could she explain? How could she tell Japanese people that Americans had shown her kindness, that a black soldier had saved her life, that she had learned to see former enemies as friends? They would call her traitor,
collaborator, someone who had betrayed her country's sacrifice. "I do not know," she admitted. "The truth would not be believed, or would be seen as betrayal."
Maybe tell it anyway. Maybe someone needs to hear that enemies can become friends, that war does not have to mean eternal hatred.
"You are braver than I am. You believe change is
Possible. I only see how much people want to hold on to their hatred." Johnson was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke with the hard-won wisdom of someone who had thought deeply about these questions. People hold on to hatred because they think it protects them, makes them strong. But hatred is the weakest foundation. It cracks under the weight of actual human connection. You and I are proof of that. He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Hiroko. "From my mother. She wanted you to have something for your journey." Inside was a simple cloth bag, hand-sewn. Inside that was the wooden bird Johnson had lent her that first night, the one she had carried every day since. Plus a new carving, a flower that looked like the pressed magnolia his mother had sent. "She says you should keep the bird. Says it brought good luck by bringing you two together. The flower is new. She made it last week after I wrote telling her about the attack, about how you survived." Hiroko held both carvings like they were made of light. These simple wooden objects represented something too large for words. Connection across impossible distances. Love from strangers. The possibility of healing. "I have nothing to give you," Hiroko said. Shame colored her voice. "You already gave me something important. You showed me that compassion works, that treating enemies with dignity can change them into friends, that the work I've been trying to do matters. That's worth more than any gift." They sat together under the trees, two people who had started as enemies and become something else. Not quite friends in the normal sense, something deeper. Two people who had seen each other's full humanity across the gulf of war. "I will write to your mother," Hiroko said. "Tell her thank you. Tell her she raised a remarkable son." "I'd like that. And I'll write to you, if you want. Let you know how Alabama treats a returning black soldier. Maybe complain about segregation to someone who understands how stupid it all is." "I want that very much." The days before departure passed too quickly. Hiroko worked her usual shifts, attended her English classes, helped with translation work. All the routines that had become normal. But everything felt fragile now, temporary. Soon it would be memories. On her last evening, Johnson walked her to the civilian quarters one final time. They had said everything that could be said. Now there were only inadequate goodbyes. "I hope Alabama changes," Hiroko said. "I hope they see you the way I see you, as someone worthy of respect and dignity." "I hope Japan heals," Johnson replied. "I hope you find purpose in rebuilding. I hope telling your story helps others understand that enemies are just people who haven't talked yet." At the entrance to her building, Hiroko turned to face him one last time. "You changed my life. You showed me that everything I believed was wrong. That people are more important than propaganda. That kindness matters More than victory. I will never forget." "I won't forget either. You changed me too. Reminded me why I fight. Why I try to be decent even when the world makes it hard. Why mercy matters." They shook hands formally. Then Hiroko did something that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks earlier.
She hugged him. Brief, proper, but a gesture that crossed every cultural boundary her upbringing had erected. Thank you, Marcus Johnson, for everything. Thank you, Hiroko Matsumoto, for seeing me, for being brave enough to change. She went inside, lay on her cot, held the wooden bird and flower. Tomorrow she would board a ship to Japan, would carry these gifts and these memories into an uncertain future, would try to live in a way that honored what she had learned here. The war was over, but Hiroko's real battle was just beginning. The battle to maintain compassion in a world that valued hatred. To see humanity in former enemies. To build bridges instead of walls. She did not know if she was strong enough, but she would try. Because Marcus Johnson had shown her it was possible. And because Margaret Johnson had sent her blessings across the ocean. And because sometimes the greatest victories are won not with weapons, but with simple acts of mercy that echo across lifetimes. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.